Welcome to psychological testing for this week and week 10 under this, and we are looking at assessment of spirituality and religious coping. Now, under this, we'll be looking at spiritual well-being skills, faith and resilience, meaning making. So, in this session, we explore how spirituality and religious function as powerful resource for coping, healing, and finding purpose. We look at how researchers and practitioners assess spiritual well-being and how individuals draw on faith to navigate stress, suffering, and life transitions. All right, so spiritual coping tools are real. Spiritual well-being skills are real. Faith can be a source of resilience for people who are going through distress or tough time. So, under this week, we are expected to learn spiritual well-being skills, to understand the major tools used to measure spiritual health, including assessment of meaning, peace, faith, connections. Secondly, you will learn about spiritual or religious coping. Under this, we will be exploring how people use prayer, word of God, beliefs, community, and spiritual practices to manage challenges, and how both positive and negative coping patterns shape outcomes. Number three is faith, resilience, and meaning making. Now, under this, you will learn how spirituality helps individuals interpret adversity, build inner strength, okay, and cultivate a sense of purpose, regardless of what they are going through. So sometimes people think spiritual tools or religiosity or spirituality is nonsense. I can tell you it's a major tool for recovery, major tool for healing, major tool for relaxation, even in psychological testing. All right, this is very important. This is very, very important. And why is this matter? Why is this matter? You know, spirituality is a center part of many people's identity and emotional life. So by understanding how it's assessed and how it supports resilience, we gain deeper insight into holistic well-being and human searching for meaning. So these are the expectation and what we are supposed to learn from this. Assessing spirituality, spiritual well-being skill. Now, spiritual well-being, SWB, refers to a person's sense of meaning, purpose, and connectedness to God, to people, or to something transcendent. In this part of the world, you hear people talking about, I believe in the transcendent, but they will not mention God. I believe in something in higher power. People mention that. Not everybody believe in the same God you have. Okay. So, but whatever anybody believes, it's important that we recognize and respect that. What are the key dimensions of spiritual well-being? Number one, religious well-being, relationship with divine. Number two, existential well-being, sense of purpose, sense of life satisfaction, and sense of meaning. Okay. Number three, communal well-being. This is connection to others, communal well-being, connected to others. And another one is personal well-being, that is inner peace, inner authenticity. You are connecting with yourself. This is very, very important. So those are the key dimensions of spiritual well-being. connection with the divine, connection with sense of purpose, connection with each other, and connection with self, inner peace and tranquility, authenticity. This is very, very important. Let's look at common spiritual well-being measures. How do we measure spiritual well-being? Okay, spiritual well-being scale measures religious and existential well-being. This is widely used in clinical and research settings. The SWBS. SWBS, that's the name of the scale. Number two, FACIT SP. FACIT SP. It means functional assessment of chronic illness therapy, spiritual well-being. Functional assessment, chronic illness therapy. It's often used in health psychology. It focuses on meaning, peace, and faith. Another one is daily spiritual experience scale, DSES, daily spiritual experience scale. Assesses everyday spiritual perceptions, not just belief. That's also can be used to measure. And the last one is brief R scope, brief R COPE, RCOPE, which measures positive and negative religious coping strategy. Because sometimes somebody can be using negative spiritual coping, strategies. So brief RCOPE, RCOP can help us to measure that. These tools are very important because they provide structures insight into a person's spiritual life. And also they help clinicians and researchers identify strengths and struggles. Strengths and struggles. It also supports holistic care, especially in health, in counseling, and pastoral settings. Support holistic care. This is very, very important. When it comes to religious coping, how faith help people respond to stress. Now, religious coping refers to the way individual use faith, beliefs, and spiritual practices to manage life challenges. That's all we do. Most of us have done that. We are still doing that. We do it most times. Okay, let's look at positive religious coping. Positive religious coping. Now, when you seek spiritual support, that's so positive. When you pray, when you meditate, when you do spiritual rituals, that's positive. Benevolent religious reappraiser. God is with me in this. That's what it means. Benevolent religious reappraiser. God is with me in this. Okay. Another one is community support from faith groups. Community support from faith groups. Another one is forgiveness and expansion or compassion practices. Forgiveness and compassion practices. This strategy are associated with greater resilience, associated with lower anxiety and depression, associated with higher life satisfaction. Those are things that it's associated with. Looking at the negative religious coping, feeling punished or abandoned by God. When people begin to feel that way, it's a negative religious coping. Spiritual guilt or shame. This is happening to me because I've not been going to church. That is negative religious coping. Conflict with religious community. Okay, I'm not going to go to church again. Church is when you begin to use all those times, you begin to fight church. That's conflict with religious community. Demonic and hostile religious interpretation. You begin to give terrible interpretation to all these things, to religious things or spiritual things. It's a negative religious coping. And this pattern often predicts higher distress. lower well-being, and need pastoral or clinical support. Sometimes it's difficult to get that out of their mind until they get to therapy. Okay. Looking at the faith, resilience, and meaning making. Let's look at this. Now, spirituality often becomes most visible during adversity. Many people turn to faith to make sense of their suffering, you know, they are find hope and rebuild their life. That's what many people does. Let's look at how faith supports resilience. Faith provides a framework to understand hardship. You can get that from faith. Faith offers rituals that create stability. Rituals that create stability. It strengthens social support network also. Okay. It encourages perseverance and hope. When you read the story of people in the Bible, then you know that there's nothing you are going through. You have grace to endure it. It encourages perseverance and hope. And of course, anchor identity during uncertainty. When there is uncertainty, faith helps us stand as our anchor. Like that Bible passage says that we have an anchor. So it anchors identity during uncertainty so that you will not lose yourself. Looking at the meaning making, look at the meaning making processes. Now, meaning making is the process of interpreting life events in ways that align with one's belief and value. You are interpreting life event in the way that it aligns with your value and your beliefs. Let me give you an example of that. When you say this challenge is helping me grow, that is, you are making sense out of what you are going through. Not many people can do that. Making sense out of your struggles. My suffering connects me to other people. Oh, I went through this and that helps me to do this. You are making meaning out of your challenges. Oh, God is guiding me through this season. You are making meaning out of what you are going through. When meaning making succeeds, people most times often experiences greater emotional stability. It helps them to be stable emotionally. It helps them to go beyond post-traumatic. That's post-traumatic growth. And of course, purposes are renewed. They are able to renew their purposes. And when it fails, individual may experience spiritual struggle. Individual may lose their identity, loss of identity, and there is existential distress. These are what happen when it fails. All right. So we need to understand this. So in integrating assessment with practice, assessment tools should be used ethically and sensitively. So the best practice or practices still remain respect diverse spiritual tradition of coming to your client and all that. Another is avoid assumption about beliefs or non-belief. Avoid assumption. Avoid assumption. Another one is use assessment as conversation starters, not label. So when you assess people, you know, you don't use assessment as a label, but conversation starters. Okay. Another one is collaborate with spiritual leaders when appropriate. Yeah, you can collaborate with them. Another one is recognize when spiritual struggle requires reverence. We need to recognize this. This is very, very important. It's very, very important to do. Let's conclude this by saying that spirituality and religious coping offer powerful pathway to resilience, hope, and meaning. By assessing these dimensions thoughtfully, we gain a deeper understanding of how people navigate their suffering and pursue well being. This is very, very important. So, I want to encourage you to find time to listen to this more and more until you understand it. And of course, reach the portion for this week. And I will talk to you again. Take care, everyone.